Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our focus on tonight's topic, we're joined here in the studio by Mr. Tarek Refaat, the journalist. Mr. Refaat, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Refaat, now talking about the visit that was paid by Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan from Sudan to Egypt at Hadaya Palace, meeting the president. Also, quite recently, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Mohammed Farid, paid a visit to Khartoum, met his Sudanese counterpart there. Now, the significance and the importance and the frequency of these visits that are taking place now, how do you view this significance and importance of these visits regarding the Egyptian-Sudanese relations and the different files that are associated to both those countries?
First of all, we feel overwhelmed from the activity of the Egyptian government, and on head of them, President Sisi. His activity is magnificent. All the world is witnessing a new Egypt who cares about Arab countries, who cares about the African continent, who really have a regional power, and not only care about its own people, but considers the whole continent, the whole region as its own people. Yeah. Concerning the meeting which took place last week between President Sisi and General al-Burhan, I find it very significant at this time, because there are so many coming files that Egypt and Sudan at the time and in the future will have together. We can name so many future projects, like we will have a railway connecting Egypt and Sudan. We will have electrical interconnection between Egypt and Sudan. So it's not only about, we are really breaking the borders between the countries, not just that we are two countries having borders between us. No, we are really breaking the borders.
Well, Mr. Refaat, do you feel that when we're working on strengthening this coordination and cooperation between both countries, do you feel that it will actually help the transitional period within Sudan? Because since the revolution, the country has been going through a lot, still going through its own economic difficulties. Do you feel that this will definitely have a direct benefit for both countries, not just Egypt, but also Sudan?
Yes, definitely. I really like this question, because President Sisi believes that each country needs to protect and own its own sovereignty, to be able to have peace and prosperity. So first, we need to make peace in the country. We need to get all the parties together. And this is what the Egyptian government, the Egyptian intelligence, and President Sisi is seeking, and is always seeking in all the African continent, whether it's Sudan or Libya or Iraq or Syria, in the Asian continent. So speaking of Egypt helping the peace in the region, Egypt once the two parties, like in Juba, we saw the peace agreement in which the Sudanese government appreciated and thanked the Egyptian government for really giving the people the right to choose what they want. So I really think Egypt has a historical part, and if some people forgot this historical part, it's the time when everybody, the whole world is watching. Egypt is back. Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is helping its African brothers and sisters to pursue peace and prosperity.
Yes. Well, Mr. Refaat, do you feel that, because whenever we talk about Sudan, we're always thinking of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and we keep following up the news for almost a decade now about the negotiations between the three countries with the foreign ministers and the irrigation ministers. Now, with such a strong cooperation and strengthening the relationship between Egypt and Sudan, do you think it will have a strong effect on the negotiations regarding the Renaissance Dam? Or do you feel that already Egypt and Sudan have already been on the same page, and it's only the issue of Ethiopia always taking a step back whenever we come close to an agreement?
Of course, like if Egypt is working alone, we must not hinder. Sudan is a strong country too. And Sudan has a powerful people who love their country and who love Egypt the same way we love them too. So being together on this issue, not against Ethiopia, but with Ethiopia, the triplet negotiations will work. Because without Sudan and without Egypt and without Ethiopia, without any one of these parties missing from the negotiations, things will be really hard. And you have the upstream countries and the downstream countries. Egypt and Sudan are from the downstream countries. So it's the same water we are drinking, we are using for our irrigation, we are using for agriculture. So Sudan and Egypt cooperating together will help push the negotiations forward, and I really believe in that. And President Sisi mentioned that it will end in negotiations, but long ones. It takes time.
Yes. Well, do you feel that Sudan is going through its own economic crisis, and Egypt is trying its best, really, to help integrate them within the regional economic integration and the international economic integration? Now, Egypt has already been doing all these efforts, not just with Sudan, but with all the African countries when they were the chair. Egypt was the chair of the African Union. Now, do you feel that we are seeing the benefits, or we will soon see the benefits of such a role that Egypt has been taking since presiding over the African Union up until now, in terms of African economy and the Sudanese and Egyptian economies in specific?
Yes. Okay. If we are speaking about the African economy, we shall never forget what President Sisi did after he was nominated for the presidency of the African Union in 2019. First of all, we have this African Free Trade Agreement, which we will talk about later. But Egypt has made very big significance when it comes to forcing and helping stability and prosperity in those countries. We can take Sudan as an example, and we can take Libya as another example, because Libya is one of the most important gates to Africa and out of Africa. And unfortunately, some regional powers don't know what's Libya for Egypt. Libyans, for us, are Egyptians. We have ties together. We have family ties. They are our neighbors. So there is no way that President Sisi nor Egyptians will leave Libya to collapse. So Egypt is basically helping the Libyans to solve the problem on their own. Without, Egypt doesn't want external interference. Egypt doesn't want some foreign fighters coming in, because this is national security. Egypt also doesn't want any fighting in Sudan. Egypt helped Sudanese people cooperate together and sign a treaty. So first of all, Egypt wants to help its African brothers, its Arab brothers, in order to build up economic prosperity, which is based on stability. So you have to build stability first. This is what Egypt is doing right now, and we saw, like in the floods of Sudan, what Egypt did, what the Egyptian military did. They sent aid full of, come on, like they are our brothers, and maybe if we have problems, they would aid us too. Like many Arab countries stood with us during the October War, and now it's time for us to help. Egypt has never forgot its brothers in Africa or its brothers in the Arab world. And we also saw, apart from Africa, we saw in Lebanon, after the Beirut explosion, what Egypt did. And speaking of the COVID, Egypt also helped other countries which is not in the continent by sending some medical aid, by sending some other food stuff or agricultural stuff and so on.
Mr. Refaat, now you've mentioned also Libya and the efforts that are exerted by the government and the presidencies to actually unite and eliminate any divisions taking place, be it among the Libyan people or in Sudan, the both direct neighbors, the western and the southern neighbors. We've also seen the visit by Lieutenant General Mohammed Farid, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. Now, ensuring that both countries are stable, securing and keeping safe their sovereignty. Also, you've mentioned any sort of infiltration of foreign fighters or extremists or militias moving around these borders. What is the significance and how well are we doing in securing and safeguarding our western and southern borders through our efforts with the Libyan people and their factions and the Sudanese people and their factions?
Like Egypt is always working for peace and prosperity, and everybody saw that President Sisi only wants the good for everyone. We don't want to harm anyone. We don't want old invasion stories to happen on our borders. We don't want to find some foreigners interfering in our countries again. So what we do is we do preemptive strategy. That President Sisi said in the Cairo Declaration, he said there is a red line when it comes to Libya. You should not cross this red line because we don't want things to become better. Let's sit down and negotiate. And because this is Egyptian national security, and we also, Libyan brothers and sisters, holding the banners of President Sisi in Libya and holding the Egyptian flag in Libya, not because of anything, but because they trust us, because they trust Egyptians, because they always come here and they are always welcomed and they have families here. So Egypt put the Cairo Declaration, like stop the fighting, not against the Western power, which is financed from foreign non-Arab country, but with everybody. Sisi wants everybody to sit together and find a solution, negotiate, stop the bloodshed. And everybody was waiting, like, will they break this red line? But nobody broke it, because when Egypt speaks, everybody else listens.
Mr. Refaat, now, if we focus on Sudan, their transitional period that they're going through, the economic reform that they're trying to deal with, the rains and the floods that were taking place there, and the Egyptian efforts in trying to unite them and try to eliminate any sort of divisions. How responsive are the Sudanese people in going through their transition period? Are they going through it smoothly? Is it a question of, are they receptive to all these efforts by Egypt and other countries trying to unite them? How far are they and how fast are they going through their own transitional period?
Okay, we saw, like in Juba, we saw everybody was happy, shaking hands, holding hands, and we were really happy. And Egypt and the UAE were praised and appreciated because of their role to help parties come together and sit down and speak. Because at the end of the day, the Sudanese people are beautiful people. They are good people. They never, if you ask anyone, did you ever have a problem with the Sudanese? He will tell you, no, I've never. Because you just see them, they are good people. And they are our brothers, and we really need to help them. Concerning the success of the transition, I really feel from the bottom of my heart, I really wish them to pursue and go on with the peace that they already sat together and agreed on. And I'm optimistic about these peace agreements, because at the end of the day, they are one nation. So I think everything will work well on that.
Well, talking about, you've mentioned the African Free Trade Agreement and the integration of Sudan within it. How do you view that process going on and the prospects that we should be expecting through a Sudanese integration within the African Free Trade Agreement?
Yeah, about the African Free Trade Agreement, it will be written, it's already written in the history that this agreement was launched during the presidency of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of the AU in 2019. And this agreement is significant. It's of a very high significance because it will remove 90% of the tariffs from 48 countries in the continent. This is one of the biggest agreements globally. It's one of the biggest agreements, one of the most important agreements. It will remove barriers of trade. It will remove many tariffs. It will raise the wages, and thus it will raise the wages of both men and women. It will raise even the wages of unskilled workers. So it's a very significant agreement, and hopefully due to the COVID it slowed everything down, but there are some instruments which the African Union is pushing forward to replace some of the strategies and plans and outlines for the agreement, because the COVID slowed everything in the world.
Well, now that we're witnessing these continuous strengthening of ties between Egypt and Sudan, how does this reflect on Ethiopia? How do they see, or what is their opinion? How do they feel about the strengthening of those two countries who are part of the tripartite meetings between the three regarding the Ethiopian dam?
Yeah, of course, when they see Egypt and Sudan together, they might think that maybe they are right. Maybe it's not all about Egypt. Maybe it's those people are talking about a matter of life and death. When you hear this sentence from one country and you hear it from two countries, of course it's stronger when Egypt and Sudan are together, because they have always been together.
Now, these negotiations regarding the Renaissance Dam, it's been going on for almost a decade, 10 years now. When should we be expecting any sort of a final resolution, a legal binding agreement between the three countries? Should we be expecting it within weeks, months, a year, or should we be waiting for another decade?
In my own point of view, I feel optimistic. And a couple of days ago, Ethiopia said, because we heard some things on the social media and people were negative and about this concern. But we saw Ethiopia saying, the Ethiopian government said that it's optimistic with the negotiations. So we have to be optimistic too. And we had very strong ties with Ethiopia a long time ago.
Yes.
And President Sisi is taking Egypt back to Africa, and this is what the whole world feels. And I think Africans and the African nations really needed this. They needed Egypt to be back. Egypt has always been there, but now it's significantly back in the heart of the continent.
Yes. Mr. Refaat, one final question now. These meetings between the foreign ministers and irrigation ministers of Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, they also have observers from the African Union and the United States as well. What role does the African Union, or what role or pressure can the African Union have and the United States on these negotiations regarding the Renaissance Dam?
We also, concerning the United States, President Trump is personally calling the three parties and asking, because he spent time, he spent his time and effort and sitting with them, and they already had an agreement. So we also that he was personally calling the prime ministers, calling the Ethiopian government, calling the Sudanese government, and asking about this issue himself. So the United States is of a big weight in this in this equation. Also the African Union, because the headquarters are in Addis Ababa, it can have a very significant effect on
Yes.
yeah, on affecting the Ethiopian regard
Yes.
on this issue.
Yes, hopefully so. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely this is one step that Egypt has been taking regarding strengthening its relations with all the African continent, a strategy that's been going on for a few years now under the leadership of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. We're going to be following up the developments regarding the Egyptian-Sudanese relations and the Egyptian-Sudanese-Ethiopian negotiations regarding the Renaissance Dam. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Mr. Tarek Refaat, the journalist. Mr. Refaat, pleasure having you here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be on the Daily Debate.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.